Welcome back to the Explainer, everyone. Today we are diving into something super fascinating. We're unpacking a text that completely bridges the gap between divine theology and, well, practical, everyday human sweat. We're looking at blessing, work, increase, the kingdom formula for wealth. Let's get right into it. Right from the jump, the source material completely merges two different worlds. We're talking about the spiritual act of blessing on one hand and the totally physical, dirty hands reality of agriculture on the other. So we're dealing with planting, cultivating, and harvesting, and that applies both in a deeply spiritual sense and right down here in our everyday physical realities. Here's the sequence we'll be exploring today. 1. The purpose of wealth. 2. The formula for riches. 3. The necessity of human work. And finally, 4. God gives the increase. All right, Section 1, the purpose of wealth, foundation and trap. The text sets up a really stark contrast right off the bat. It says that resources placed in an unsubmitted heart, well, they simply become a trap. But when wealth is completely surrendered, it transforms into a totally vital tool for advancing God's agenda on earth. You see, prosperity isn't separate from purpose. God is actively looking for people he can actually trust, people who will manage resources generously to build up lives and strengthen his house. And Psalm 115 gives us the framework for this trust. It says God owns the heavens. Absolutely. But here's the catch. He intentionally entrusts the earth to us, to humanity, to cultivate and to steward. What does that mean for us? Well, it tells us that the journey from blessing to actual wealth is not a passive one. It is a direct, active partnership. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the formula for riches, a sequential process. So Proverbs 10:22 is the absolute foundation here. It says, "The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich." Sounds super simple, right? Just get blessed, get rich, and preferably by tomorrow afternoon. But wait, how does that spiritual blessing actually translate into tangible, real-world wealth without bringing any sorrow with it? Well, the text explains that there's no magic roadmap that just skips to the end. It happens through a very specific, grounded sequence. The absolute crucial point here is that the blessing is merely the beginning. Think of it as the raw material. First comes the blessing, then work, then increase, and that finally leads to riches. Responsible human work is that critical bridge you literally have to cross to reach the final manifestation. The author points out a really fascinating detail from Genesis chapters 1 and 2. God created the garden, meaning the blessing was already fully present. But it didn't fully manifest right away. Why is that? Well, because as the scripture notes, there was not a man to till the ground. The blessing was definitely there, but work is the thing that actually makes it visible. Let's jump into Section 3, the necessity of human work, partnering with the divine. Genesis 2:15 makes this active partnership crystal clear. God put man in the garden specifically to, quote, dress it and to keep it. God creates the raw potential, for sure, but he requires humanity to step up and give form, order, and expression to what he's released. Without human hands actually out there tending the soil, that divine potential just remains completely locked away. And the text backs this up with some truly powerful biblical evidence, showing where human action is the literal seed for multiplication. Take Elisha at Jericho. When he healed the bitter water, he required a human action first. They had to bring a new cruse and salt. Or think about when Jesus fed the 5,000. He didn't just snap his fingers and rain bread from heaven. He asked for what they already had. A boy providing 5 loaves and 2 fishes became the exact catalyst for a massive miracle. Jesus' parables reinforce this exact same idea, proving that the journey from blessing to wealth is never, ever passive. Whether you're looking at the parable of the talents, the vineyard, or the servants, the theme is completely identical. The kingdom advances and wealth is generated exclusively through faithful people who actually put their hands to the plow and do the work. The author makes it abundantly clear here. You simply cannot achieve an overflowing, abundant harvest without first committing to the diligent, sweating, roll-up-your-sleeves labor of cultivating the soil. The blessing absolutely requires human effort to actually yield fruit. All right, bringing us to Section 4, God gives the increase, the final step. The author uses the Apostle Paul's words here to remind us of the ultimate source of the growth. Paul says, "I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase." Now that is a vital reality check. While we absolutely must put in the tiring labor of planting and watering those seeds, we don't hold the power of life itself. Only God can actually make it grow. There's a traditional Yoruba proverb cited in the text that summarizes this so perfectly. It goes, "Ukoninse she, olorunin sonne." That translates to, the farmer labors, but God makes it grow. Honestly, it's just the ultimate summary of this whole divine partnership. So, the fundamental rule of the text is laid bare. From breaking the tough soil all the way to watering that fragile little seedling, you have to plant and water. If you don't, well, nobody, not you, not your community, will ever see the increase. Period. The text uses Jacob as a final, incredibly fascinating case study. Think about it. Jacob received a massive divine blessing from God in Genesis 28, and he had nothing but a literal stone for a pillow at the time. The spiritual blessing was 100% present in that exact moment. But the actual physical wealth, the flocks, the herds, that only manifested after years of applied wisdom and hard work while serving in Laban's house. The blessing was absolutely there, but the work is what brought the manifestation. So based on this kingdom blueprint we've just unpacked, we are left with a very direct question for ourselves. Are you passively waiting for a blessing to just drop into your lap, or are you ready to actively partner with the divine and get out there to work the harvest? The blessing is just the starting line, guys, but the effort, that is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will catch you next time.
If this message opened your mind, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Master Sense by Faraday, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs wisdom, clarity, and inspiration today. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful lesson. Remember, knowledge becomes power only when you act on it. See you in the next video.
Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating source text that offers a structured, actionable blueprint for moving beyond just a spiritual blessing and turning it into tangible, real-world wealth. The author breaks down exactly how to bridge that gap, and we're going to explore that entire framework together. You know, the text argues that we all face a fundamental crossroads every single day. We're constantly making a choice. Do we prosper God's way, or do we chase after other temporary paths? The framework we're looking at points us toward honest work, integrity, and stewardship. And honestly, that fundamental choice, it sets the trajectory for everything else we're about to discuss. To unpack this roadmap, we're going to cover 4 key pillars. Number 1, prosper God's way. Number 2, start where you are. 3, the true source. And 4, the kingdom wealth builder. So let's jump straight into section 1, prosper God's way. The source material actually challenges a really common misconception, the idea that God doesn't want people to prosper. By pointing to historical heavyweights like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the text argues that prosperity is absolutely part of the plan. But there's a catch. It has to be built on the premise found in Proverbs 10:22, which says, "The blessing of the Lord maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it."
And the text draws a really sharp contrast here between these two paths. It describes worldly money as basically having wings. I mean, it can literally fly away or leave a person completely stranded in the middle of their life. On the flip side, the argument is that building on a divine foundation creates lasting wealth. You get to entirely skip the anxiety, the burnout, and the sorrow that so often comes with the usual worldly hustle.
That brings us to section 2, start where you are. A major point the source emphasizes is that legends absolutely do not start at the top. Historically speaking, shepherding was apparently the ultimate entry-level job for future leaders. Think about it. David was out tending sheep when he was called. Moses spent 40 years tending his father-in-law's flock. Joseph worked in brutal conditions as a slave and a prisoner. The author points out that if you ever feel frustrated by your current position, well, this framework suggests it might just be your necessary training ground.
The blueprint also pushes back hard against the idea of ever being completely empty-handed. Referencing the biblical story of the widow who only had a small pot of oil, the text essentially says, don't wait for that perfect opportunity or a better job to suddenly start giving your best. Instead, giving your absolute best right where you are, even in a small, seemingly insignificant place, is presented as the exact path to the big place.
Moving on to section 3, the true source.
The text introduces a really fascinating equation here. Power plus production equals wealth. Based on Deuteronomy 8:18, the author argues you absolutely need both of these elements. You know, a person can be given open doors and divine grace, but if they fail to put in the production and actually do the work, nothing happens.
Conversely, just grinding away and producing without that divine blessing yields results that simply won't stand the test of time. So, work is the necessary mechanism. You've got to get out there, till the soil, plant the seeds, and water the crops, much like a farmer relying on a harvest. But using Psalm 127, the text argues that human effort all by itself is just laboring in vain. Work is the physical mechanism for sure, but divine blessing is viewed as the rain. It's the essential ingredient that actually makes the work stand and yield a lasting harvest. Finally, we arrive at Section 4, the Kingdom Wealth Builder. To really illustrate this specific mindset, the source points to King David and the congregation offering willingly for the temple. Now, even after being explicitly told he wouldn't be the one allowed to build this grand temple, David didn't just pack up and go home. No way. Instead, he poured his own wealth into preparing the ground and gathering materials for his successor, Solomon. The text uses this incredible story to define a kingdom wealth builder. It's someone who views themselves purely as a steward of resources rather than an owner. So to summarize this entire blueprint, the source argues that for believers, the spiritual transaction is actually already complete, citing Ephesians 1:3. The framework then outlines 3 physical steps you can take to cooperate with that reality. 1. Decide to prosper God's way. 2. Start exactly where you are, with what you have. And 3. Acknowledge God as the true source. To put all of this into practice, the source material offers a highly actionable assignment. The challenge is to literally write down the tools you currently possess. This could be a specific skill, your physical health, some free time, a smartphone, or even just one really good idea. The author then encourages you to dedicate those exact tools to your purpose this week, rather than waiting for conditions to be quote-unquote ideal. As we wrap up this explainer, the framework leaves us with one final super practical question to ponder. What 3 things do you have right now? By focusing on what is actually present rather than what is missing, the source argues that anyone can find the exact seeds they need to begin building their future. Thanks so much for tuning in.
If this message opened your mind, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Master Sense by Faraday, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs wisdom, clarity, and inspiration today. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful lesson. Remember, knowledge becomes power only when you act on it. See you in the next video.